Between Washington and its trading partners, the Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 0.15%. The S&P 500 gained 0.33%, while the Nasdaq Composite Index was 0.76% better, closing at 7,567. For more on the markets, we cross to Arabile Gumede at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Arabile, welcome back after your globe trotting. Asian markets not looking great today.
Yeah, well, all the way from Paris right through to those Asian markets, right? So, yeah, the Asian market itself, a little topsy-turvy here and there, a little bit of green. If you take a look at the Shanghai Composite Index, which was down 0.4% by close of trade, but the Hang Seng not doing well, 1.4% lower on that front as well. Just exactly where that stems from is perhaps those trade tariffs and the talks between China and the United States with regards to imports and exports as well. Just how far will Donald Trump go with regards to these? And of course, comes into effect this week. Will a plan be made, or will they just steam forward and roll ahead with just how the situation goes with regards to those import tariffs? It's going to be quite interesting. On the European front, it is a bit of a green day today on that front as well. So it seems that markets themselves are trading fairly well, but the JSE not sitting in good territory, however. With that, let's take a look at how the markets in Europe and locally are performing. Quick look at how the Bitcoin is faring as well. $6,583 for a single Bitcoin, while in South African rands it'll set you back 93,175. It is down around 1/3% today. Chris Gilmore, independent analyst, joining me in studio today. Chris, thank you so much for the time. Market movement today on the JSE, red, stemming a little bit from the US close, which however was in the red, in the green yesterday. Where do we get all this negativity from?
I think from a variety of sources, but predominantly, and it's coming really from what you were talking about right at the very beginning here, is this negativity surrounding emerging markets across the board, and particularly China.
Yeah.
So you talk about the trade talks. If we don't get a situation where you get an accommodation on the Chinese front, and I think really what's happening here is Trump and the Chinese are kind of playing a kind of Mexican standoff here. The Chinese situation isn't nearly as good as people think. Yes, of course, their growth has been fantastic over the years, but there's an awful lot of debt in there, and it's not nearly as stable as a lot of people think. So I think Trump is using this as a kind of leverage, and he's basically saying, guys, if you don't come to the party, if you don't play ball, we're going to apply these tariffs, and sorry for you.
So do you see the tariffs actually coming into place?
I think they could come in, and as I say, it's a game of hardball, but they might come off relatively quickly. Because at the end of the day, this doesn't help Trump. It doesn't help America. We saw the comments that the CEO of Harley Davidson last week made about Trump. He called him a moron.
Yes.
It's not the first time someone's called him a moron. So, I think he is playing hardball. This is where Trump comes from. He's not a diplomat. He's not a politician. But he knows how to play hardball. He's playing a very dangerous game. So it may work with the Chinese. But look, as I say, nobody wants a full-blown trade war. It doesn't help anybody. To go back to the days of the Smoot-Hawley tariffs in the 1930s, which just exacerbated the situation of the Great Depression, really would not help.
All right, well, 0.1% lower today. Let's see how that fares by close of trade. But I think the important factor, and something that I wanted to touch on, was perhaps that fuel price today going up 23 to 26%, depending on the variant, of course. The price of oil as well, sitting at $78.11 a barrel. It's up 1% today. The rand sitting at around 13.72 rather, should I say. This picture just seems scarier and scarier. It could go higher even from here.
Yeah, it's pretty bleak. Look, as far as the US dollar oil price is concerned, I think there's something of a cap here. I think we've had most of the bad news, so to speak, on the the geopolitical side coming to the fore. Iran, it looks like they're realizing that they're going to have to do something about getting more oil revenue, and these sanctions are really hurting, and they were hurting before. So that I think is going to result in a situation where the oil price doesn't necessarily go an awful lot higher. Also, don't forget that this kind of relatively high price it pulls in a lot of the American producers.
Yes.
America's still a big producing country, and not just the normal producers, the shale producers. So I think there's probably a bit of a cap there. The worrying factor, to come back to your point, is on the rand-dollar exchange rate. And with this concern, with this negativity, this nervousness surrounding emerging markets generally, the rand is looking fragile. It's one of the biggest emerging market currencies, and many of these speculators see it as a proxy for emerging markets. So if emerging market sentiment stays poor and for quite some time, the rand could go weaker, resulting in a further deterioration.
Not necessarily our own doing then.
Precisely. No, I think, and that's a very good observation, because, you know, a lot of people are pointing fingers at Cyril Ramaphosa. It's really got nothing to do with him. You know, yes, we could perhaps explain things like expropriation without compensation a little bit better, but I don't think that's necessarily what's happening. This is a general emerging market situation that South Africa is getting caught up in, unfortunately.
Because we had a real uptick from the South African point of view, particularly towards the end of last year. You saw a huge stream into South Africa's bond market, the currencies as well, but the emerging markets were picking up. How do we get back to that? Can we do it ourselves? Do we need something to change internationally? Do we increase interest rates?
That's a very loaded question. Look, I think when it comes to interest rates, we'll be very lucky if we manage to keep interest rates stable at these levels. I think the chances are we're going to have to raise interest rate. Absolutely. Sure. If you look at many of our peers in the emerging market space, Turkey, for example, they raised their interest rates by, 300 basis points a few weeks ago. Yeah. I'm not suggesting that anything like that's going to happen. But I think the likelihood is we may see a 25 basis point rise before the end of the year. So, you know, that's the first point. Beyond that, Arabile, there's not an awful lot that this country can do about the situation, because what is required is growth. And unfortunately, we're trying the same old tried and tested methods to get some sort of consumer-led growth, but the consumer is unfortunately tapped out.
33%, however, of the entire fuel price is at least going to be dedicated then just to the road accident fund and to the fuel levy. Having seen the latest with regards to the road accident fund, a lot of questions will be asked of Eugene Watson's office. Should we be considering taking that away? Is it helping anybody in any case?
Yeah, it's just a bottomless pit, isn't it? And as you say, but it's a big part of government's funding.
Yeah.
So for a government that's as cash strapped as this one, I cannot see them doing anything on that front. And I mean, these are easy levies to go and just implement. Yeah. We saw it in the budget earlier this year. So look, I don't think we're going to see any relief on that front, unfortunately.
Yeah. Very quickly, wanted to get to another equity story. Glencore as well, being subpoenaed by the US as well. Money laundering laws and faltering some of those. Well, where exactly are we with regards to the story? What is going on and how bad is it?
Look, it's a story that's still unfolding, so we're going to get more detail as the days go on. But basically, the US Department of Justice is looking for an explanation of what's been going on in their operations in Nigeria and the DRC. Two countries where money laundering and other kind of schmockles are not particularly rare, shall we say, to put it diplomatically. Yeah. So the problem you've got is once the DOJ in the US gets its tentacles into you, it's very, very difficult to get out of it. They've got incredible reach all around the world. And so a lot of people are going to be having to answer some very, very difficult questions.
Yeah. We're, as you said, speaking in a time, of course, where things are happening and it doesn't seem, to be helping them in any particular way. Just taking a look at Glencore's price as well. Down 11% today, now sitting at just under 57 Rand as well for the Glencore Xstrata. That's in the PLC as well. So quite an interesting front on there. What happens on the equity front, we'll continue to see. It is slightly down today. Will it be able to pick itself up is something we'll be taking a look at. 1370 odd for the South African Rand against the US dollar. Do we see an uptick there is also going to be another question. Take a look at that oil price. It is bound to cause a few worries as well. Will it head to 80 is another question. We'll get back to Nompumelelo and Nzinga right after the short break.